Thank you, Lawrence, and good afternoon to all of you. Continue to eat. I can talk louder, I think, if this microphone will help me. I firstly want to acknowledge the privilege that I have and that we have in honoring Joe, my partner for many, many years, who really has had a lifetime of learning, and as you could tell, at 83 and retiring is still a gifted speaker and, more importantly, a gifted mentor to so many of you in this room. And we're very privileged to be able to have these two additional scholarships that we're going to be able to give, along with Lawrence, in honor of Joe. So I want to again acknowledge and thank you, Joe. I've been given a short time to try and focus on an aspect of our business that will hopefully fit in with all of the other speakers today. And so I'd like to talk about becoming a trusted advisor, and more specifically zero in on what do you say and what are the communication things you do in front of the client. But let me begin by going back perhaps 18 months. And I was invited to sit in the boardroom of one of our major banks with the CEO of the bank and a significant multi-billion-dollar client. I was meeting with the family plan executive. We might have called him the gatekeeper. And the conversation began with him explaining why I was there. And he said, I've chosen you, Jim, because of your background and history, and I need your help. I need your help because we as a family would like you to recommend to us 4 key advisors who will work with our family. And we talked a little bit about various things. And I said, well, I'm very aware of some of your history. And you have several members of the family who have purchased in excess of $100 million times many members of the family. And he said, I know. And I said, I know your firm has never chosen to compete. And I said, I won't compete on that basis. And he said, that's why I'm here. He said, I'm tired of discounting. I'm tired of getting your local friend to go and get me discounted advice, whether it's in insurance or whether it's in accounting or whether it's in the legal profession. And what we need is someone to participate with us. What we need is someone to be an equal advisor with us, someone who has the backbone to stand up and say, this is right and this is wrong. What we need is that trusted advisor. And that was very insightful for me at the time. I'm now on the board of a group which is called IFEA, which is going to create a designation for those of you who want to work with family enterprise business. They control, depending on the province, between 70 and 90% of the economy. They're tired of the commoditized approach with advisors. They're desperately anxious as families to look to people who become the trusted advisor. I tore many articles out, and we don't have the time to look at them, but the titles, if you look at the Financial Post and you look at the recent articles, it's all talking about building trust, or how do you become the client advisor as part of the team, or how can you become that trusted partner. Clients do not want order takers. They want, and they need, and they will get trusted advisors. Today, in my time, I'd like to briefly share about trusted advisors. What sets them apart? How can I become one? I think there are several keys to becoming a trusted advisor, and yes, I don't have an hour to go into them all. So I'm going to flit over the tops of the iceberg and isolate 3 or 4 points that I throw out to you to think about, and some of our speakers have already spoken about. I believe some of the keys for the trusted advisor include becoming a specialist. You can't know everything about everything, but you can know everything about something. You have to become knowledgeable. And that knowledge obviously ties into our commitment to education, but it ties into your preparation for the client. Thirdly, develop a conviction. I believe if you want to be that trusted advisor, you have to become passionate that what you do matters. Peter talked about that before lunch. Ted talked about that before lunch. What we do matters in terms of funding estate planning, funding estate equalization, holding companies together, funding capital gains tax, creating charitable gifting. Tremendous opportunities that what we do matters. Develop that conviction. Develop confidence, not arrogance. The confidence that allows you to take very complex material and break it down into simple ideas and simple questions and become a team player. Recognizing, as Peter's described earlier, that our job... Okay? Okay. That our job is to work with others in providing that broad consultative approach to the customer. And I'm sorry I don't have the time to go into all that, but I've been limited. They don't have a tempting screen in front of me to block me out, but I do know you want to go on to visit with each other. What I'd like to do in my few minutes is focus on another key ingredient. That is client focus. Now let me set the stage by pulling back maybe 30,000 feet before I get into the interview and talk about the customer. Client focus is to me essential, that we're not focusing on the industry and we're not focusing on our peers, but we're focusing on our client. And I don't have the time to share my beginnings, but it was interesting when I was listening this morning to various people, I was tempted to share my humble beginnings, which really started in a small town north of here with no technical backup. But the luxury I had when I came into the insurance business of, because I was on straight commissions, being able to go to the tax foundation and start working with lawyers and accountants to work with my clients. I wasn't aware that I was successful or not in the industry terms because I was focusing on clients. And so in the first year in 1972, when I was able to sell several $1 million policies, I didn't realize that that was unusual because you were supposed to write 50 policies. I was only focusing on the customer. And as I began to focus on the customer more, we were able to write $1 million premiums and $10 million annual premiums. And now we have folks who are writing $150 and $200 million face amounts with clients. Why? Because they're not comparing to each other. They're doing client focus of focusing on the problems that the customer has. Now let me zero in. Let me zero into what do I do in the meeting? What do I do that sets me apart as a trusted advisor from a hustler? Well, firstly, that client focus has to mean that when I'm there with you as a customer, I'm there entirely. I'm there to listen. It was interesting when Peter described Ralph Simmons, and Peter, I couldn't write fast enough to write the whole sentence down, of the gift that Ralph had of being that unique, open-minded, intensively interested listener. There's an old Zen story that I don't have the time to tell you in complete, but I'll give you the synopsis. And so the master asks the student to pour a cup of tea, and he pours the cup of tea. And then when the tea cup is filled, he says to the student, continue to pour. And he continues to pour, and now the cup is full, and it's flowing over the table and onto the floor. And he put it down, and he asked what the lesson was. You see, the lesson was this: if I fill my cup up with myself, I have no room for you. If I empty my cup, then I can fill it with you. And that's an important principle if you want to become that trusted advisor. Push aside all of your own thinking and all of your interest in earning commission and all of your interest in terms of other things. And if you want to be that trusted advisor, start off with focusing. That full focus, your customer needs it. That means preparation. That means not rushing out with an illustration at the last minute. It means knowledge before you attend, knowledge about the client, knowledge about their industry, knowledge before you have that invested energy. When Ted talks about 2.5 years for a client, and Peter would talk about the same with these families, it's that investment that sets you apart as the trusted advisor. Secondly, the trusted advisor knows the questions, not the answers. The traditional approach of memorized sales talks and memorized questions to objections throw it out. The trusted advisor knows the questions. And as Joe had said, you ask the questions, and the customer will continue and will eventually solve the solution of the problems. That questioning technique, thank you, extends to direction. And Joe was one of the pioneers of what we call the broad concept, where you learn a series of questions and ask those questions to the customer and allow the customer then to build their own vision of where they are. Third, listen, not tell. Listen carefully to the words and to the music of our customer and wait for the answers. Clients read us quickly in our body language, and it's not the physical look of our body language. It's, are you really listening to me, or are you holding your breath so that you can jump in and tell me something? One of my mentors was a gentleman named Don Dunbar. Don was an amazing man, referred by lawyers and accountants in the 70s, and he also suffered from narcolepsy. And that only occurred a couple times when I was in his presence, but he was a gifted questioner. And so he would sit in front of the client, and he had a favorite phrase of saying, "You've built this empire, and what do you want to have happen to the empire?" And then he would stop. And at one point, he fell asleep. And the customer continued on and on and on to tell him everything, and finally went around the desk and woke him up and said, Don, I think I've given you my whole life story. Is it now time for you to go to the next question? And as much as it was humorous, Don was an extremely gifted salesman because he listened. And he listened and he listened. Fourth, allow the client to become an active participant in the process. Allow the client to dream. No, I would say challenge the client to dream. Listen, incorporate, customize the planning for them and with them. Fifth, joint decision-making versus closing pitch. Focus on the legacy for the client versus the sale. There's so many liquidity needs that insurance fits. We don't need to overplay. We don't need to oversell. We participate together with the customer. And sixth, have the credibility and the conviction to implement the plan. Wills, structure, insurance. Take Joe's concept. We need the empathy that I've been describing, and we need the, I don't like calling it killer instinct, but we need the confidence and the conviction that if it's right, I'm going to make sure that you do implement it, and implement the will and the structure and the other documentation. I'd like to close by giving you two case stories that perhaps will help you put some flavor onto the points I've been making. About 2 years ago, I was contracted by a family, actually, and it was by an advisor for one of the members, and they had sold out for an excess of $200 million. This individual was a recognized leader in his industry, flew on his private jet to different parts of the world representing his industry. A hostile bid had come in and bought them out for $200 million. I was attending with the longtime loyal agent who had been in the business for many years, and so when we were invited to come into the advisor, they said, "You're too late. A major bank has come in, a major insurance company has come in, they've already offered all the solutions." And they described what their solutions were. Attaching someone else's personal trust to try and get some advantage because of the limited period in time. Principal protected notes and some insurance liquidity. And they said, "You're really late in the game, but would you, if you want to, because of your loyalty, you can give us a proposal." I said, "I'm sorry, I don't do proposals." And they said, "Well, it's too late." I said, "Well, may I ask you a question?" I said, "This one brother is an industry leader, has recognized an industry leader all over the world. He's now been bought out in a hostile bid. Has anyone asked him what he wants to do for the rest of his life now that his platform has changed?" And so I started asking a series of questions to the advisors, and they looked at me and said, "Oh, no one has asked him those questions, and he's such a dominating person, we don't think we can." And I said, "May I have the privilege of going to talk to him?" I went to talk to him, and I asked him the same questions. And I asked him, "What do you want to do now that you've lost this platform?" And he was almost crying, and he said, "They've got me in a box. They say I can't even keep my private jet. I can't do all the things I was doing before because I now have to conserve all of this estate for my children." I said, "Well, what do you dream? What have you dreamed since you were a child? What do you really want to do? You're worth so much money. Surely you can't be locked in a trap." And he said, "Okay, let's go away." And so we went away for half a day and started to dream about the things he wanted to do and where he wanted to go. And so the end result was exciting for him and exciting for us. In the end, yes, we did keep his private jet, and we kept a brand new car, and we put $25 million aside for a sports team he was thinking about, and we put another section of money and created their own charity for he and his wife and his children to be actively involved. And how did we do it? It's easy. We replaced $40 million of that locked-in money, and we could do it with cents on the dollar to replace in his estate, and gave it to him to enjoy his life now. That's an example of being the trusted advisor versus someone hustling from the side. My second example was one where I failed. And so we were involved with a client who we had discussions with, but unfortunately the agent quickly jumped into the close and tried to show him his solution. And this particular client chose to find someone else who had a discounted solution and bought it. And about a year later, I met this person on the street and asked him how he was doing, and he said, "I'd really like to talk to you." And we had coffee. And over coffee, he said, "I'm really frustrated because I'm still worried about what I'm doing." And we started talking about his family and the fact that he was worth about $60 million, and his brother hadn't talked to him because his father gave him the business when he was young. And his son was in the business, who was a medical doctor, and his daughter, who had an MBA, wasn't in the business because he couldn't figure out how to deal with that. And I said to him, "What if there's no tax? What if I take all the tax off the table and you could do whatever you want?" And he smiled and he said, "That's easy. I want enough money for my wife to be secure. I want my son and daughter to have equal rights to grow up and be balanced and speak to each other. I don't ever want them to be like I am with my brother. And I want to make sure I provide all that environment." And I won't go through all the details, but obviously I can tell you that we succeeded. We succeeded eventually sitting with his wife and his daughter and his son and restructured the company in such a way that, yes, we covered the capital gains tax. But more importantly, we provided money to provide the intergenerational transfer, because if one of the children didn't want to stay, they were treated equally. That's what you and I do. That's what we do as trusted advisor. So my summary in my short time here is this. The market is huge in serving family business. The market is huge for people who have our technical skill dealing with insurance. Liquidity is a dynamic alternative for all of our customers. And clients need trusted advisors. You heard that when you heard Peter, when you heard Ted talking. You could hear the steps in their experience of how they've become trusted advisor. And the only reason I shared my story of how I began is I want to speak to any of you who are new in the business. You don't need to be 5 years. You don't need to be 10 years. You don't need to be 20 years. I was privileged to be able to find this fast track in my first year in the business. You can become that trusted advisor within the next 24 months. Just commit to these steps. Commit to the capital you need to make the change in your life. And I want to encourage you, as you listen to everyone, to know that this huge marketplace, at the top end of the marketplace, is desperately open and needing you as the trusted advisor. Thank you very much.